Mike Wilkes is a member of our New York Advisory Council, and he has run with our theme Once Upon a Time in Cybersecurity and has blended that into his session. And so he even took the time to create a little song. So we're going to play that song for you, and then Mike will get going with his presentation. So thank you very much.
Yo, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the weakest link of all? Is it the system, the vendor's flaw, or the IoT chilling in the hall? The stadium's lit, but the risks are higher. Legacy tech mixed with wires on fire. Third-party hooks, they're the silent spies. No alerts, then the threat just multiplies.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that. Courtesy of several large language models. I took the presentation, I asked ChatGPT to make some lyrics. I guided those lyrics a little bit on my own. Then I went to suno.ai and asked it for a Trump hip-hop track. And that's what we got. So it's quite good. It's actually up on SoundCloud if you want to hear the whole thing. But I was impressed. These tools have gotten a lot better. These tools have gotten a lot better than they were when I was playing around with them first. I was advising students to use ChatGPT 2.5 when I was having a PhD student in my class at NYU who was in civil engineering, and I was having them use the model to do intent and analysis of construction contracts. But anyway, my name is Mike Wilkes. I think here's the clicker. Thank you for that introduction, Drew. Happy to come up from New York and share some thoughts. I really got excited about this presentation, which is why in January is when I made that walk-up music. So here's a little bit about myself. I've been a CISO several times, but I've been doing critical infrastructure for about 30 years. And I've been a part of the internet since it grew up. One of my first claims to fame, I think of as launching Starbucks.com in 1998. I was working at a company called Organic Online, which was based in San Francisco, and this was the .com bubble, right? I think of it as the roaring 20s of my generation. And for all of you that have gray hair like me, it was the roaring 20s for your generation as well. The infinite possibilities, the internet 1.0 could do anything. Then, of course, I wrote a book for Cisco Press in 2002, and for a certification that doesn't exist anymore. I gave birth to PlayStation.com, running the team for the PS2 that gave them their first e-commerce website where you could order PlayStation consoles online. And then, of course, I quit. After 5 rounds of layoffs and the collapse of the internet bubble, I decided to move to Europe and was one of the last people standing at that company called Organic Online that did all of these great things. Macy's, Blockbuster. I launched and ran the teams that gave birth to those early e-commerce websites as well. If only Blockbuster knew that Be Kind Rewind was not the future, they might still be relevant. But anyway, so I built Rabobank's direct banks. I built ING's DR infrastructure, put KLM behind Akamai. So I had a lot living and working in Europe, in Amsterdam for 11 years. And then when I came back to the US, I ran the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the CME Group's enterprise server platform, which was about 10,000 servers and $2 quadrillion in contracts traded. So those are some pretty big numbers. Not everyone gets to use the word quadrillion in public conversation. And then I was the head of infrastructure for AQR Capital. If you've ever seen the TV show Billions, working at a hedge fund is exactly like that TV show. It's not fiction at all. It's amazing. It's cool, but it's also kind of crazy with the type A personalities and the tempestuous kind of personalities that go with them. Then I was the first CISO for ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. I'm a jazz musician, I play drums, I loved being able to do music and, CISO cybersecurity at the same time. And this is a 100-year organization, 100 years old, had never had a CISO before. So I build security programs. Then, of course, people like to hear a little bit about some of my time as the CISO at Marvel. I started as the head of DevOps, then I picked up enterprise architecture, and then eventually information security. So for me, Marvel was one of the fun periods, of course. I like to joke it was my job to keep Iron Man safe. And if you know what happened after I left, poor Iron Man. But then, of course, I started teaching at NYU. I was the CISO at Security Scorecard, which is a security ratings company. And then, let's see, I was nominated in 2020 to be a technology pioneer with the World Economic Forum. And I worked on oil and gas cyber resilience white papers and case studies, as well as a really sexy topic called quantum security. So imagine the Reese's peanut butter cup of hype, where you take quantum and machine learning and you talk about quantum machine learning. So wait for that hype cycle, I'm sure it'll come soon. Then I was a fractional CISO for a healthcare startup in California called Lark, and started a small business in New York called the Security Agency, then started teaching at Columbia University, and most recently I've been the CISO, the first ever CISO for Major League Soccer. And this is our 30th season. We're very excited about that. I actually resigned that position last month. I can talk about it afterwards if you'd like to, but certainly love what's happening with soccer in North America and with the Club World Cup this year and the FIFA World Cup coming to the US and Canada and Mexico next year. All right, so enough about me. Reflecting on mirrors. So it's important to understand that there's all kinds of mirrors. I really got into this idea of thinking about how can the mirror be an interesting metaphor. I studied philosophy in college. I have 2 degrees in philosophy, actually. Computers just a hobby that became my career. But I think, I don't want to be too cheeky, but there are different types of mirrors. There's magic mirrors, there's funhouse mirrors that make you look taller than you are, that make you look thinner than you are. And when I was at Security Scorecard, I used to say, we're holding up a mirror to you and showing you what your external attack surface looks like. And a lot of people, a lot of CISOs, would go through the 5 stages of grief. They'd be like, that's not my crown jewels, I don't care about that, right? And they'd go through bartering, anger, frustration, eventually they would get to acceptance. And so I think it was important to bring that perspective. We don't want to distort the mirror, but mirrors are naturally going to have different criteria, different properties. You have an infinity mirror, you have smart mirrors, you have mirrors in the bathroom that have heating elements behind them that warm them. You also have tiled mirrors, pocket mirrors, and of course adjustable and acoustic mirrors. These are used for radio telemetry. And all different kinds of mirrors, I think, can give us some perspectives on how we think about our own risk and how we look in the mirror and figure out who's the most vulnerable. So this talk is going to be about third-party risk management, and I'll bring some of my experience in some of my prior roles to that topic. So, the vanity mirror, self-serving evaluations, surface deep assessments, right? This is skin deep, compliance, aka not security, where you just check the box. Do you have a firewall? Yes, I have a firewall. It's right there in the box on the floor. It's not racked, it's not configured, or it has an any rule on it, right? Compliance is not equal to security in a lot of people's perspective and mine as well. And so I think we do have this concept of a vanity mirror that we hold up to ourselves and say, I'm good, I get to go home tonight and not worry about the security of my posture of the organization that I'm trying to protect. So not everyone that's interested in protecting infrastructure is doing security. A lot of them just stop short at compliance. And so I think if you go for security and you build a good security program, you pick up compliance along the way. And so I think we should all focus on good security. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting to introduce or mention here would be the Rouge test. So if anyone knows psychology and child development, anyone's parent, at some point the child begins to understand that they are an individual and that they are not the image that they see in the mirror. And so sometimes they'll try to touch, the bit of rouge that they put on their cheek or on their forehead, and they don't know the difference between an image of themselves and themselves. And so I think there's a lot of companies that don't know the difference. They can't pass the rouge test. This is a fun photo of my family in Bali at a temple on an island, and I love the mirror effect looking out at this amazing skyscape. A travel mirror, right? You need to have your sort of pocket assessment, right? What is your minimum viable set of controls that you try to maintain? What do you want your third parties to maintain as a minimal set of controls? So not everything has to be 1100 NIST. 1100 controls, a part of NIST 800/53. You can do smaller frameworks. You can do CIS top controls, 153 questions across 18 domains. The travel mirror, of course, is a substitute for the full-on, like in my room, the full-on, full-length mirror where you look at yourself, feet, toes, hair, shave, everything. And we look in this mirror, and we are both the observer and the observed. And I think it's important to think about this. So I get a little philosophic here. In cybersecurity, third-party risk is not just about assessing others, it's also about understanding your attack surface. If your attack surface is good, then they're going to go for your weakest link, and that's going to be one of your third parties. When we send out these questionnaires once a year, like you send out a questionnaire to your vendors, and one of the first questions on that questionnaire is, have you been breached in the last 12 months? Well, that's certainly the last time you want to learn if you sent this questionnaire to Okta. Hey Okta, have you been breached in the last 12 months? And they're like, yeah, actually 3 or 4 times. You didn't read about it in the news? And I was like, oh, shields up. That's the last minute you want to know that something bad happened with a vendor. So you need this thing that I like to call event-based assessments. And again, security scorecard is in my blood. I love the ratings and the insights that you get from them and other vendors in the same space. You get continuous monitoring. That's the only way to have a good finger on the pulse of the risk of you or your third parties. You can't do periodic annual questionnaires. It's just security theater, sending out 1,200 questionnaires to 1,200 vendors. Or Intel, for example, if you have 20,000 vendors, all of which could disrupt your supply chain. Intel doesn't need to have a 300-person vendor risk management team if they can do continuous monitoring like they do at companies like Security Scorecard and build a portfolio of all of their vendors. And I'm not talking about just your tier 1 core service providers. Even the person that prints your logo on a pen or on a beer cozy is a potential attack vector. Why? Because they send you an invoice. And that invoice, be a PDF, comes from a trusted domain. It could have a 0 day. So you really need to monitor all of your vendors, not just tier 1 or tier 2 vendors. Does anyone know the face of this? Let's see, my slide notes aren't advancing over there. Anyway, I believe that, what was this that I put in here? Did I put it in the slide notes? I'm trying to remember. It's a philosopher. And anyway, this is a forensic image analysis of where some of the images, where the image may have been cropped or copied and pasted or touched up a bit. But I think that when we're talking about mirrors and awareness of self and sense of self and our own risk, self-scoring or that of our third parties, we have to think about perception, identity, and truth. And the perception, of course, is that, sometimes somebody on the executive team, a CIO or something, reads something in a magazine and they say, what are we doing about this? There's this 0 day. And of course, that's a very sexy, shiny thing for you to be distracted by. And a lot of times we're not doing proper security on the basics. The basics are not fun, they're not sexy, right? DNS, patching, vulnerability management, scanning, multi-factor auth. All of those are the core foundations. Alex Stamos gave a great example of this in one of his talks that I saw. He said, cybersecurity is not Olympic diving. You don't get extra points for difficulty, right? You have to do the basics, right? You can't just be distracted by the shiny things, the 0 day. What are we doing about the Russians injecting prompts into our LLMs and our upstream models? Well, wait, you still have no SPF record on your DNS. You still have no DMARC or DKIM that's protecting people from spoofing emails from your company. Why are you worried about these esoteric attack vectors? And so I think we need to pretend to ignore, although it would be insubordination if you actually ignored the CIO's request to do something or say something about what is your mitigation for that risk. But we really do need to work on some of these historically difficult challenges. At Scorecard, when I joined in 2020, we would Nmap all of IPv4 every week. And we saw 20 to 30 billion vulnerabilities spread across all of these IP space. A couple of weeks ago, one of those scans, 230 billion vulnerabilities. So things are orders of magnitude worse than they were 5 years ago. And it's the same number of IP addresses, right? So more vulnerabilities, more misconfigurations, more risk. In terms of identity, the digital self is not an intrinsic essence but a composite of access controls, authentication protocols, beliefs, intents, decisions. This is the cognitive dimension of cyberspace. Everyone always talks about protecting the data, and that's fine. Data at rest, data in transit, but we need to deal with the sort of OSI layer 8, which is the wetware between our ears. That's the weakest link. That's the area where our perceptions and our ideas and our personas are being compromised, being cloned, and being impersonated. And so we have to think about identity as sort of this composite of all of these things, assertions of identity. I have multiple personalities that I use when I download a white paper from someone's website. I don't always sign in as Mike Wilkes. I use Roberto Santiago, and that is my nom de plume, right? Just like George Orwell wasn't his real name. George Orwell was the nom de plume of Eric Arthur Blair. Just as a fun Easter egg, whenever I create a surveillance or monitoring user, I always make the username E. Blair for people that get the joke, right? Because it's Big Brother, surveillance, 1984. The last piece on this slide I think I want to talk about was truth. In the age of information, ignorance is a choice. And right now we're living in a very interesting time regarding information, disinformation, and truth. People talk about truthiness. They talk about how something feels. There's a lot less reliance and belief and trust in facts and whether or not there are facts. And so without getting too political, I think it's interesting to think about a lot of people choose to be ignorant. They don't want the facts. And that could be your board of directors. That could be your boss. That could be a third party that you're working with. So there's a lot of complexity wrapped up here in perceptions of identity and truth. Third-party risk, I figured we don't often talk about first-party risk, second-party risk, or fourth or nth-party risk. We always talk about third-party risk. So I just wanted to talk about 3 dimensions which I like to use to analyze risk, which is attestation, awareness, trust, and control. And so for first-party risk, this is self-attestation. This is you and your company. And you have complete internal awareness, or at least you should know where all your assets are and what software is on them and what risks there are. Trust is exhibited through direct control. And then, of course, enterprise risk management is the framework that is used for first-party risk. Second-party risk is your customers. These are the ones that are using, like I said, customer attestation, a Yelp review, right? Somebody posting something on Glassdoor about your company. In this case, you have firsthand but partial awareness, meaning your customers experience whether your website works, whether it's been slow, whether they can book an airplane ticket, whether they can buy a book online. And so they have that first person experience of part of your infrastructure. And then trust is exhibited through familiarity and loyalty points and programs, although I think there's a lot less loyalty these days among the generations and among the brands. People will switch pretty quickly. And then, of course, the contracts, right? The click-through terms and conditions. That's the framework and contract risk management. Third party is the sweet spot, of course, for what I want to talk about with the rest of the slides. External attestation. You want objectivity. When you want to do a good pen test, you ask a third party to do it for you because you want them to be objective. You don't want them to ignore the soft, squishy parts of your API that the developers are secretly saying, don't test that, that's going to break. And of course, you have incomplete awareness of what's happening with third-party infrastructure like Amazon or Okta or others. And of course, Okta and other companies, they have vendors as well. And that's where you get fourth-party or nth-party risk. Of course, trust, I said, is through impartiality. That's why we like third-party auditors, third-party analysis. And then, of course, vendor risk management is the framework. So this last one, all of your vendors have vendors. And so that's where you get this sort of contextual fourth-party or nth-party risk. And those are the ones where there's a lot of concentration risk if you tried to map all of the service providers for your third parties. Whenever US East goes down, a disproportionate percentage of the whole internet stops working. That's a concentration risk. A lot of people are just running out of US East 1A. If you know the availability zones, you know there's 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. And then, of course, people should be running things in US East 2, or if they want to be in another region, US West. But it really depends on your business as to whether you want to pay for that bandwidth cost to replicate your data out of region. But nth party, it's really peer attestation at this point. You have minimal awareness of even that you knew. You might not even know that you had this vendor. Think of all the people that didn't know they had Kaseya that was distributing, ransomware when it was violated and, supply chain attacked. And it was actually distributing ransomware as a remote monitoring and management tool. Same thing with the SolarWinds attack. Trust is by proxy. You're trusting the fourth party because you trust the third party and they selected them. And then lastly, I want to make a point about ecosystem management. So what you see here is a picture of the Ever Given lodged sideways for 6 days in the Suez Canal, and it disrupted the global supply chain. There were chickens in containers that died. There was, IKEA furniture that didn't get to Europe on time. There was a huge thing around the disruption and sort of a cascade effect of what's called systemic risk. The more complex our systems become, the more interconnected they are, the more sensitive they are to disruptions, even a few links away. And a supply chain is not 3 links. It's not your suppliers, you and your subscribers. It's the whole ecosystem. Supply chains are not 3 links long, but we often act like they are. So expanding the risk landscape, I want to talk a little bit about IT and OT and IoT as our protect surface. I don't necessarily like the frame attack surface. It's too violent, it's too warfare related. So I think protect surface is a more resilient approach and language to use. And of course, the proliferation of IoT devices. So I'm going to talk a little bit about stadiums from my recent experience with MLS, and also maritime transportation sector. So what do we have? On planet Earth, and this is something I got from Brian Contos, who gave a great B-Sides talk in New York last year at John Jay. We have about 10 million interesting servers on planet Earth. And we have about 5 billion interesting laptops that you might want to compromise. So not every laptop is interesting. And we have about, like I said, 230 billion vulnerabilities spread across servers and misconfigurations across IPv4 on any given week. OT, at the moment, or at least when he gave his stats, which I am giving him credit for, 50 billion OT devices. And guess what? 50% of them have a default password that's in the manual, that's in the PDF, that you can read online, and 74% of them are running end-of-life firmware. So there's a lot of zombies and ghosts of IoT and OT out there that are never going to get security updates. And so patient zero might be a laptop when someone clicks on a link, but where do the threat actors go to stay persistent and resident? They go to the OT network. They know that there's no CrowdStrike agent running on your printer. They know there's no CrowdStrike agent running on your Nest thermometer or your fish tank thermometer, if you know the story about the High Rollers database that was exfiltrated in Las Vegas through the fish tank. The fish tank was on the internet, and it happened to be on the same network as the back end for the casino. All right, so here's some of the interesting OT devices in a stadium. We're talking about concessions, we're talking about the doors and the gates, you're talking about Wi-Fi, you're talking about bench Wi-Fi for the teams, you're talking about the broadcast networks, you're talking about all sorts of attack surfaces for things that don't necessarily get security updates or have security teams operating. Point of sale terminal, for example. This is not material non-public information, this is public information. There was a breach of a point of sale for one of the clubs in California that was a ransomware attack that disrupted the match. And so you have to think about, again, that third-party risk has to be continuously monitored and it has to be protected. Fire safety systems, FAN mobile devices, all of these cell networks condense and collapse whenever you get like 30,000 cell phones in one space. Or at MetLife where they do like 70,000, where they're going to have the Club World Cup this summer and the final for the World Cup next year. That's a nightmare of assets that have to be protected. And I don't envy the folks that will be doing the work, although I did dive into it a bit. There's a lot of on-pitch devices. There's something called a connected ball now that FIFA is using, which has a gyroscope and accelerometer inside the ball. And so they can actually tell whether there was a handball because the ball's trajectory was altered slightly. But what if you were, a zealous, very enthusiastic fan, and you wanted to hack the system, and you wanted to pretend that there was a handball event? There's sensors all around the stadium that are being used to pick up on these balls that are in play and not in play. All of the players are carrying these catapult telemetry device gathering. Some of them are actually talking to satellites because they can't rely on local radiomagnetic frequency spectrums not being saturated in the match. So they're actually using different protocols to talk to satellites and GPS to get some of this information. These things can be hacked. These things are not necessarily being protected as well as, I don't know, FireEye's, threat intelligence infrastructure, for example. The other things, from my own experience, I volunteer with the Area Maritime Security Committee for Sector New York for the Coast Guard. And so we did a tabletop exercise on Staten Island, and we did a sector-wide MARSEC level 2. What would it take to raise the maritime security level from MARSEC 1 to MARSEC 2, and what would be the criteria for bringing it back down? And so we had a scenario, I can't talk about it too much, but it's been something I've been working on for a couple of years now to help advise Coast Guard on how to do cyber. They know what to do if the ship is sinking, or if, for example, the Dali crashes into a bridge in Baltimore and takes out that bridge. I always thought that the headlines on that were wrong. They said bridge collapsed. And when I think of collapse, I think of like a marathon runner, getting to the final, crossing the tape and then collapsing, right? And that they're like worn out, they're tired, they're potentially weakened from the fact that they just ran a marathon. What happened with the Francis Scott Key Bridge was the bridge was destroyed. It was hit with over 200 million newtons of force. It was hit by something the size of the Empire State Building crashing into it. It never was designed to handle that kind of a disruption. Now, can you imagine if this was a cyber kinetic attack? All you have to do to hack these systems, and these are some of the systems on ships that can be compromised. They have hack the boat conference sessions in DEF CON, and these kids, these young hackers, they're able to compromise these systems without even reading the manual. They just fuzz the communications, and they say, oh, I can steer the ship now. Oh, I can inflate the ballast on one side of it, and I can tip the ship over. They don't even bother to learn the protocols. They just learn to abuse them. So I think one of the things that's interesting about this coming period in critical infrastructure, thankfully, a notice of proposed rulemaking was approved to add to Title 33 of the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, which is for the MTSA regulated entities, Maritime Transportation Security Agency or administration. So there's about 30,000 of these in the US facilities. About 12,000 of them are large enough to need, I think about 3,000 are large enough to need to have a CISO, to do tabletop exercises, to do red team exercises, and to do pen tests on an annual basis. So they finally leveled up the maritime requirements. They used to be really vague, and they used to be really, light. And now at least they're starting to do some best practices. So I'm really looking forward to the fact that there'll be a lot of work for CISOs, even if it's just 2 hours a week, or if it's 20 hours a week. The Port Authority in New York, New Jersey, they have a CISO, Mikhail Solomon, and Mike Edgerton that I work with. They don't have to worry, they're already in the driver's seat because they're such a large concern. But a lot of smaller ports are gonna need this kind of talent. And we're not gonna be able to upskill all of the OT people. We're gonna have to take some IT people and teach them how to protect OT. This particular slide is a picture that I got at a conference for the MTS ISAC. So hopefully all of you are aware of the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers. I gave a conference speech in Florida last year for the MTS ISAC Summit. And this was a slide that was put up by Carnival. Carnival had just managed to get all of their ships, their fleet of 92 ships, onto a network where they could monitor them continuously. Again, so that's one of the themes here, continuous monitoring. Of course, this is the Dali, and this is the containers, and this is the bridge that it destroyed. It's an impressive photo from, I think it was from the New York Times. But anyway, that was March 29th in Baltimore, but it could happen to you, right? There's no bridge that can handle 200 million newtons of force hitting it. This is the Voyage data recorder that was on board the Dali. So there's more devices that we have to keep track of, more devices with interesting data. This thing is capable of recording, I think, something on the order of 34 days of internal data. This is the black box for all of the ships, right? We talk about planes going down and recovering the black box, figuring out the telemetry, what did they do, what did they not do. Of course, the DALI lost power 3 times while it was in port, and then it decided to head out. And of course, there was no tug with it to guide it, and so it drifted and it took out the bridge. But anyway, there's lots of scenarios like this that I think are going to be in our near future, where actual threat actors are taking advantage of these vulnerabilities, looking at third-party risk and exploiting it for various reasons. And we used to only have to worry about nation states and organized crime. And life was difficult, but life was good because we understood their motivations. But now we have to worry about bored teenagers, lapses, scattered spider. These kids are using nation-state tools and doing it for the lulz. They're not doing it for ransom. They're not doing it to disrupt a competitor of a foreign nation. I think it was Charles Carmichael, the CTO for Mandiant, who gave a talk in New York recently, and he said that they actually bring a high school guidance counselor onto ransomware calls now, because kids are hacking companies because they're being bullied at school, and they're hacking into these companies for bragging rights. So talk about motivations, through the roof. The next one I'm waiting for is the AARP, when you have an octogenarian who uses some of these, ChatGPT to write malware and take over all of the inheritance of all of our parents. So that's sort of my prediction for the next layer of threat actors. The Association for the Advancement of Retired People, isn't that what it stands for? Anyway, so the need for continuous monitoring. It needs to be real time. Can't be point in time, can't be once a year. And you need to do event-based, meaning a score drop or a breach. Obviously, you want to respond to that breach after the breach happens and say, okay, I want you to fill out this questionnaire. Or I see your score is headed towards a D. Maybe I need to be concerned, right? Why aren't you patching your internet-facing assets? We can see that they are not up to snuff. And even if you have an A, that doesn't mean you won't be breached. One of the things I like to talk about is breach cadence, not breach likelihood. Some companies, like T-Mobile, they seem to get breached every 6 months or more now. And if you talk to the people that work in incident response, off the record, it's probably every month. But other companies like FireEye, it took APT-29, Russians' Cozy Bear, it took them several years of low and slow to get into SolarWinds in order to breach them. So I would put them at a 5-year breach cadence. But we've all heard the mantra, it's not if you will be breached, it's when. And I like to think how often. And how quickly can you stand back up with confidence, because you're dealing with right of boom. A lot of our frameworks, a lot of our focus is on prevention. And I'll leave you with one quick Ben Franklin meme from 1765. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We've actually codified that into our frameworks. And so I've done a talk previously called A Pound of Cure. I actually think we need to focus on right of boom, because we know boom's going to happen. The threat actors are going to win. It is an asymmetric battle. They have to get it right once. We have to be correct 100% of the time as defenders. So real-time visibility, third-party integrations, tools and techniques. SOAR platforms have been around for a while. I saw a demo recently of someone using Copilot and Microsoft's Dynamic Apps Lab to isolate a machine and run a full scan on of it. And they were using AI to do that. I'm like, what do you mean? Devo and other tools have been doing this for years, right? That's the first responder's task whenever there's a quarantine event. So sometimes we're just reinventing the wheel and not making any improvements on things that have been around for a while. Real-time visibility, periodic assessments, of course, I think mentioned this enough. Periodic assessments, annual assessments are not good enough. You need to be able to monitor this stuff continuously. Of course, your mileage may vary, right? For some organizations, and in this case, I'm thinking of the Air Force and the military, and you ask them, do you continuously monitor your Air Force bases? And they're like, yes, we audit them every 3 years. And now for me, continuous monitoring means 5-minute time series data, right? Where you're constantly checking the pulse of the security posture of the entity. So I think this was a fun Gen AI image where I asked it to do a steampunk picture of risk. Then let's see, third-party challenges, supply chain opacity. We don't know the supply chain. We don't have good ways of exploring. You know, we have SBOM and HBOM, right? Software bill of materials, hardware bill of materials. Supply chain bill of materials, what would that be? That would be SCOM, right? Or SCBOM. The idea of not even knowing that you're using Log4j under the hood, that you're using Kaseya as your remote monitoring, and that news story that just popped on this TV last night in the news channel is actually going to affect your company. A lot of people don't learn this for a while. A lot of people didn't even know that they had SolarWinds, and they weren't even logging the access. So when the FBI and others came to them and said, hey, you've been a part of this massive breach, they're like, oh, we don't even know if the Russians are still on our infrastructure because we don't have logging turned on, right? That's the level of immaturity that we're dealing with. And then lastly, systemic risk. Complex systems exhibit properties that are not imbued in any one of those nodes, but they're dependencies, right? There's this sort of non-linearity, sensitivity to initial conditions. When you think about encryption, you need source of entropy to generate a good private key. When a server is born, like a VM, it's often like, I don't know if I'm aging myself here by referring to Frosty the Snowman, but when he goes, happy birthday, right, he puts on the hat and he comes to life, it's like he's having a lobotomy, right? He just suddenly comes to life that day. The VM servers are just like that. Their initial salt and their initial access to entropy to generate a good private key is 0. And so a lot of encryption and a lot of attacks actually get through because of the fact that we don't pay attention to this sort of complex, sensitive initial conditions related to an emergent property of these complex systems. Now, if you had a really simple system and you used sticks and stones and you didn't have cell phones and 5G, you wouldn't be in this situation. But our digital economy is set up in such a way that this is part of our risk. And so that's the name for it, systemic risk. Let's see, tools and techniques, SIEMs, SOARs, and co-pilots. Like I said, I've been around for Web 1.0, also 2.0, and now I'm fairly critical of some of the weird things that are happening with crypto in Web 3.0 and the distributed ledger. But anyway, there's very few assets in the Web 1.0 era, right? You had a website, when we launched Starbucks, it was 4 machines behind a load balancer, and you couldn't order a latte online back in 1998. But it's become a much more complex ecosystem. And of course, vendor consolidation. This is just one of the snapshots of all of the industrial cybersecurity vendors and services. And if you'd like a copy of these slides, there's a hyperlink to the source, so you can check out some of the content and references. Lastly, building holistic resilience. How do we build something that's better? How do we actually put resilience into our systems? Nicholas Taleb wrote a book called Anti-Fragile. And in this book, he talks about how human bones, when subjected to force, become stronger. How do we build infrastructure? The more it's attacked, the more stronger it becomes. And so if this is Boston and we know the marathon runners have amazingly strong bones in their legs, right, from all of the running that they do. So how do we build systems with that kind of property? Some key metrics that we might want, obviously you need to have good proactive partnerships with your third parties. You need to have holistic resilience with good monitoring and detection, using threat intelligence sharing with your ISACs and other community like InfraGard. I'm a member of the New York Metro chapter as well. And then of course identify the right KPIs to monitor effectively. So you can't just monitor whether an IP address is listening with a particular port. You need to do transactions against it, because it could be spitting back a server 500 error. And if all you do is ping and port monitoring, you don't even know the system's down if it's malfunctioning. Let's see, proactive partnerships, continuous collaboration. How do you get into those conversations now before the breach so that you know who to call and they trust you? They wake up at 2 a.m. if you call them and say, hey, there's something going on, I need you to join a bridge line. Shared accountability, we need to foster a culture of trust and openness where vendors are encouraged to share their security insights, their insider threats, their incident reports, and without fear of punitive damages and punitive reactions, like reporting something to the FBI or reporting to something to CISA. How am I doing on time? I don't see my clock. Okay, great. We'll finish up and then ask for any questions. So this holistic resilience concept, Microsoft has the Xbox 360, and they've been marketing that for so long, and everyone talks about 360, right? It's 360 degrees of visibility. and it's now boring and tired. And so everyone's moving to one, Sentinel 1, Workspace 1, ADP 1. Well, I think I understand the concept of one, but it's also kind of boring. So I think 720 is better. So I think of a dome of clear web, right? 360 degrees in a three-dimensional space. And then I think about the under dark web 360 degrees of attack surface as well. And that a holistic program then is a dome of 720 degrees of visibility and control. So there's no blind spots. And the way I translate this into actual security awareness and actual security programs is treat the person as if they are a risk even when they're not behind their company laptop. Everyone does company training. It's like, don't share your company passwords. No, don't share your passwords with your uncle at Thanksgiving or your aunt, right? When you're on vacation, make sure you're being secure. Make sure you're using HTTPS. Make sure you use a VPN. Treat your clients, treat your customers, treat your staff, treat your contractors as if they're a holistic dimension of risk. Why? Because they are being attacked. They are being targeted. Certainly your DevOps engineers are the ones that are being focused on, for example, in the LastPass breach. There was a DevOps engineer, they got a keylogger onto his personal device. They never breached production at LastPass, but some idiot decided to put 30 million vaults on a dev environment S3 bucket in Amazon. And so they got in through all of his dev credentials, which were not MFA. Production was locked up tight, but a copy of all the vaults were sitting somewhere else. Those have been exfiltrated, those are now being brute forced, and now we're seeing evidence of people spending wallets where the only existence of that wallet's private key was in their LastPass vault. So they're basically brute forcing all of these passwords offline. Better business continuity, of course. How do we embrace failure? How do we embrace things like the chaos monkey that Netflix used to build, or the simian army? There's a great book by Kelly Shortridge, who's a brilliant thinker, called Chaos Security Engineering, co-authored with Aaron Reinhardt, that is the next evolution of thinking about the chaos monkey that was a part of Netflix's demonstration of their fault tolerance. So some of the key metrics, I would say that we could be looking at the percentage of third parties with critical issues. We could be looking at average risk ratings of the whole portfolio. Let's say that you're the state of New Hampshire, you have municipalities, you put all the municipalities into a portfolio and you look at the collective risk, and then you go for the stuff that's the most common. That way we don't go after the shiny 0 days, the shiny objects. We go after the real pedestrian risk. Percentage of service providers that have a SOC 2 or a Type 2 or that have an ISO 27001, frequency of audit and compliance activities. These are some of the metrics that I like to try to track with my third parties. Percentage of business critical vendors that have real-time monitoring or that you can monitor them real-time, mean time to respond, third-party incident contribution rate. How often do they tell you about things that may affect you? Because you need to maybe shut down their logins on your platform while they've been breached or compromised. Practical steps for your organization, immediate actions, conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of your third-party vendors, looking for critical assets, monitor them continuously, and the long game, of course, join these threat intelligence communities of the ISACs and others, share the information, get engaged. Here's the Operation Shut-Eye that I did with the Coast Guard. And of course, there's lots of things that can be done to improve the ability to communicate and to respond and to recover. So that was it. I just wanted to finish it with the last, I guess, quote, which is, who's the most vulnerable of all? The most vulnerable is the one who fails to look in the mirror. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
And if you'd like a copy of the slides and for any of the visuals or hyperlinks that are there within, go ahead. This is a mail to code. I'm not giving you malware. And I will send you a copy of the slides with the speaker notes.
Any questions? That was a lot of information thrown at you. Thank you so much, Mike. We really appreciate you coming over from New York and sharing with this group. Let's give him a round of applause, folks.